Today, we welcome to Global Citizenship Education interview series Lou Marinoff, a Commonwealth scholar originally from Canada. He's professor of philosophy at the City College of New York and founding president of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association. Lou authors international bestsellers, including Plato Not Prozac, that apply philosophy to the resolution of everyday problems. The New York Times called him the world's most successful marketer of philosophical counseling. Lou works with global organizations that foster cultures of peace, prosperity, and harmony. Bellwether Alliance, BioVision, Dussier, Festival of Thinkers, Soros's, Sohoka International, SGI, Strategic Foresight Group, and the World Economic Forum. So, Lou, it's a great pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining the Global Citizenship Education interview series.
You're more than welcome, Emiliano. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Lou. So, to begin with, I'd like to ask you a straightforward question. The first question is, what is a philosophy for everyday life? And particularly, how does this concept relate to global citizenship and cosmopolitanism, if at all?
It's about 3 or 4 questions lumped together. let me try to unpack it for you. A philosophy for everyday life is akin to a human operating system or a web of beliefs. Everyone has what Quine called a web of beliefs. Against which or in relation to which one's experience is interpreted. We are constantly interpreting our situations, our circumstances, our experiences, our aspirations. All of these things are subject to being located, situated, and interpreted within some prior existing web of beliefs, which you could also consider to be a human operating system. It's modifiable by experience as well as the interpreter of experience. So it's somewhat elastic, but also somewhat rigid in terms of potential principles that one holds. So this is how we basically justify decisions and actions. There's always something that stands behind what we think, say, and do, although it may not always be articulated well. And such a philosophy could be derived from a religious background or from a secular tradition. They are both going to give rise to philosophies of life. Now, in relation to cosmopolitanism first, because I think that's a smaller term than global citizenship. It's an older term, and it relates to the idea of being familiar with, let's say, living in different countries or different cultures and being able to adjust fairly quickly. And again, you can think of it as a module that one adds to one's operating system. If you've never lived in Italy and suddenly you're living in Italy, so you will learn how things go there. And this would apply to any country or culture. So the original, I think the idea of cosmopolitanism, at least from late Victorian times onward, was this notion of being comfortable in more than one culture and perhaps speaking more than one language and being able to navigate very comfortably. But global citizenship is a more complex and a continuously evolving term, of course. But I would say that to be a citizen in today's global village, it's like cosmopolitanism plus, because one has to be mindful not of just a few other cultures and civilizations, but many, and also of the way in which they interact.
Absolutely. So you see sort of dynamism in terms of languages, cultures, interactions, perhaps interactions between the two philosophical regions and even faith and religion. And I think this is a good bridge with the next question. And the question is, in light of the super complexity that we are facing nowadays in our societies, what does it mean educating for global citizenship, in your opinion, based on your experience as a philosopher, scholar, editor, author of bestsellers, and someone who is really experienced in dealing with organizations worldwide?
Well, again, this is a really interesting and no less complicated question, because the notion of global citizenship is not going to be one necessarily uniform definition. The term itself is constantly evolving. So let me give you an answer from my own perspective, which I think is fairly global, in the sense, as you kindly mentioned, that I've been traveling the world and working with a number of global organizations for about 20 and more years. So I have some experience in this as an educator primarily. What does it entail? A number of factors which are not necessarily all related in unison, but I can just give you some, if you like, perspectives on what it might mean. Firstly, educating for global citizenship could mean an ever-expanding context in which particular expertise are situated within which they are deployed. So we used to talk about an education as being a kind of a hermetically sealed capsule of knowledge. So, okay, so you know biology in some specific area, or you know engineering, or you know medicine, or whatever subject you're studying, and you have, a specific core set of expertise. That is what we used to mean by an education. And it was sort of tacitly assumed that you would find a way to deploy this within the context of your culture. But globalization is much more than this, because we need to understand what is the context in which such expertise are being situated, and how are such expertise being deployed in relation to everything else in the environment. What we arrive at from globalization is this interconnectedness. And so the complexity that you alluded to, and everything is more complex all the time, brings us to a very interesting and perhaps somewhat alarming point, at times certainly alarming. Complexity always entails vulnerability to perturbation. So the more complex a system or a network or whatever it is that you're trying to discuss, the more complex it is, the more vulnerable it will become to change. The more moving parts it has, the more it can go wrong with it, to put it, in simple terms. We saw a very graphic and tragic demonstration of this with COVID. The whole world order was shaken up. Supply chains were destroyed. Nationalist forces emerged to circle the wagons to try to protect their citizens. We saw all kinds of things that really went against the tide of what we had called globalization. So that was because of the complexity and the perturbability of the world order in 2020. So that's just one example. Another thing that's important is that educating for jobs that don't exist yet poses a different kind of challenge. And all people in universities are preoccupied with this question now. How do we educate people for industries which may emerge in the next few years? I have an answer to that, which may not be as universal as others, but I believe—
For example?
Well, I think that we have to always keep the basics in sight. If people are able to read and write and reason well, then they will be able to accommodate to technological innovation and other kinds of changes that are imposed. So I think that there's a strong foundation of education that we don't want to lose sight of. Also, of course, the digital revolution impacts this in a lot of ways, as we're seeing with AI in its latest, incarnations. But I want to say something important also about this, Emiliano, and I think it's really a kind of a vital insight that gets lost. That is that every generation can start its journey at the leading edge of STEM. We can always pick up in science, technology, engineering, medicine, where the previous generation left off, and we can continue to develop and to learn and to invent and to innovate. That's for sure. But moral education begins anew in every generation. Moral agency is not something that one generation inherits from the next. So I really firmly believe that we need always to retain and implement a component of moral education to develop this human capacity for moral agency. That does not happen on its own. You throw a computer at a child, the moral agency is not necessarily in the equation.
This is very interesting. This is very, very interesting, because I want to build on this and ask you, whether or not you believe that there is a lack of discussion around ethics and values in nowadays higher education. In my publications, either books or scientific articles, I always try to stress the lack of discussion around ethical values, critical values, for example, social justice, ecological awareness, and so on. I'm very much curious to know your perspective on this, particularly on the notion of values and the lack of discussion around values in our educational system.
Well, I wholly agree with you that it is not a good thing that there is such a neglect. And as a philosopher and professor of philosophy, of course, I teach these things regularly. Tonight, I'll be inaugurating a new semester at City College and teaching secular ethics.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. But I mean, it's vitally important. We have students from more than 150 countries at City College, so it's a microcosm of the global village, and they are burning with curiosity and interest to discuss these issues. What they are subject to, and I have to say this because it's clear, certainly in the United States of America and throughout the westernized world, it's clear that students are being subjected to political indoctrination, and that's a very, very different thing from moral discourse. So they're very rich in ideology and very poor in deeper thinking. And they all have, by the age of 18 or 20 or 25, they have some clearly formed views about the meaning of goodness or rightness or justice. But to really develop one's capacities as a moral agent, it's necessary to go deeper and do comparative ethics and meta ethics and really understand what it means to employ a principle and the effect that it will have on others. So I think that a good education in a humanistic sense would delve much deeper into the moral foundations of humanity and not neglect all of that in favor merely or solely of STEM.
All right. So when it comes to connect principles of global citizenship, ethics, ethical values in a deep sense, as you just suggested, what are the 2 or 3 principles that you see as core, key, although it's always difficult to put together a sort of a list of keywords because the domain is so vast and huge, and the discussion can last forever. And you and I would definitely like to do so. But I want to call my audience attention to 2, 3 principles that you believe are very important to be discussed in nowadays education, not only in terms of global citizenship education, but in terms of education more broadly.
Well, beautiful question. You really stopped me in my tracks with that, to come up with 3 keywords that would somehow capture the essence of global citizenship, or at least as I view it. So I did come up with 3, and I'll be happy to share them with you and give you a quick reason, in each case, why I think they belong in this very restrictive set to describe a huge phenomenon, in only 3 concepts. But I give you the 3: awareness, agility, and service. To me, are the 3 outstanding key concepts. What is awareness? As you just said, it goes beyond facts. It goes beyond education, being able to regurgitate knowledge. Awareness means consciousness of the larger picture in which we are all immersed. Yes? So awareness is knowledge plus consciousness of different perspectives and different cultures and the way they interact, and also the way they conflict and how dialogue can help to resolve it. So this is very important, and awareness is therefore something that in a certain way runs contrary to ideological education. It has to be bigger and deeper than that, and more humanistic too. Agility, and by agility, I mean the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, regardless of one's professional formation. We've just seen drastic economic shifts imposed on certain sectors by the pandemic, and emerging from the pandemic, there will be more changes going forward. So whatever field one is in, one needs to be at least potentially agile in order to navigate these kinds of changes. It also means mobility. So there is a certain presupposition that people can change their location, change their country if they need to, in order to fulfill their mission. And that third thing is because it is really, in the end, all about doing some good in this world to make it a better place, rather than to leave it in worse shape. And everyone has that capacity to improve not only their lives, but also the lives of those around them. Because of this incredible connectedness in real and virtual terms, everyone can have a huge impact, more than they think. So the concept of service is, and it's independent and transcendent over your particular occupation. The idea is to help others in some concrete way, in whatever domain you find yourself working, to make things better rather than worse. Work for the good, the common good, and this also will help you as an individual. That would be the message.
Excellent, excellent. So let's now get into a question that usually my guests here like, and they're always pleased to share their own journey of life. So the question is how, for example, concepts of awareness, agility, service, contribution to the common good, as you just said, relate to your journey of life, both in terms of human being and educator, philosopher. We all have multifaceted identities in a way as we navigate this world. So how these concepts and perhaps even other concepts that you like to bring in relate to your journey of life?
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, every author, every philosopher, I suppose, loves to be asked this kind of question. But in my case, Emiliano, the concepts and the journey are one and the same. In 1999, I published a book called Plato Not Prozac, which became an international bestseller. I didn't know that it was going to do this, and neither did the publisher, but suddenly it became hugely in demand in many, many languages.
What's the core message of the book for our audience?
Oh, the core message of Plato Not Prozac is the subtitle. It's utilizing philosophy in everyday life to solve normal problems that people are bound to encounter. Not every problem in life is medical. Of course, if we're fortunate to have access to leading edge medicine, then we can certainly prolong our lives, as has been empirically demonstrated. Psychology is important also for understanding one's emotional configuration and all of this. But beyond that, as we began, Emiliano, by saying everyone, whether they know it or not, has some philosophy of life. And this is really the operating system that drives them. So Plato Not Prozac opened a door for millions of people who had never previously considered that their own philosophy of life may not be serving them as well as it might. People encounter all kinds of issues in life, whether it's career change or relationship issues or ethical crises, moral dilemmas. All kinds of changing circumstances compel people to think very long and hard about what to do. So philosophy can be of inestimable value in these kinds of situations.
Right.
So the book acted as a spearhead globally, actually. First, it let people realize that philosophy was an underutilized resource that had been perhaps taught to them only as a theoretical subject, not as a practical one. And maybe in America particularly, people avoided taking philosophy courses in university because perhaps they did not realize how useful a given idea can be at the right time.
Right.
It stimulated a demand for philosophical counseling and consulting services. In response to that demand, a number of pioneering philosophers in many countries stepped up and identified as philosophical practitioners. So it created a synergy which allowed a lot of things to happen in the development of practical philosophy. Of course, I'm not the only one who was doing this, but at that time, there were core pioneers in many countries. We became aware of a movement, and since then, it's made tremendous strides. So that was the beginning of the journey for me. Resulted in a lot of travels, a lot of experience at different strata of politics and society, working with world leaders, with CEOs, working with young people. All of it has been an education for me as well as for them. But it all comes down to the same three terms: awareness, agility, and service.
Right. I'd like to ask you if there is any episodes or moments of your life, rich of encounters with scholars, youth, people with different backgrounds and moments, particularly important for you, where you realize the importance of the work you're doing, and perhaps potentially how this connects to our discussion on global citizenship. Anything that you remember particularly like to share with our audience?
Well, I mean, it's incredible. I remember too many things in some sense, and it's almost impossible for me to do what you're asking me to do, is to pick from this 20 and 30. I've been a practitioner for 30 years now, but on global circuit, if you like, for more than 20 years. But it seems to me that the most gratifying thing is certainly when people come up to me after a book event or a book signing, or I get an email, or I meet someone, at a convention or a conference, and they say, this idea was life-changing. And it happens over and over again, that people discover something in themselves that becomes activated. I call it awakening the inner philosopher. So if you accept the premise that a lot of people do have an inner moral compass, but it is not calibrated, or a lot of people do have potentially an inner philosopher to guide them, but that philosopher may be in a dormant phase. This kind of work in practical philosophy helps to awaken that inner philosopher. And this is life-changing. It also changes the way in which people relate to each other. And this has happened over and over and over again, whether it's a CEO or whether it's a student who comes forward and says, this was fantastic and life-changing. That is the, if you like, proof of concept that this really works, that awakening people to their own inner philosophical capacities is a worthwhile journey, and for them, again, potentially a life-changing experience.
Very interesting, very interesting. So we are heading toward the conclusion of this very interesting conversation, but I'd like to ask you a question on your recent projects, books, events, conferences, courses that you're going to teach. You just mentioned a very interesting course. And perhaps a couple of important projects that you believe are core at this stage of your research work and other projects, generally speaking.
I would be thrilled to share very briefly with you some recent books that I published. I'm constantly teaching and doing workshops and programs and things, but for the benefit of your audience, if I may, and since I'm an author, I'm so shameless, that I prepared.
Please.
So this is called The Middle Way. This is 2020. The Middle Way, ABCs of Happiness in a World of Extremes. This is the second edition. It's available online, and it actually is about the global village and about all of the axes along which, unfortunately, we have polarizations, political, religious, educational, economic, you name it. The world is too polarized. And the ABCs are Aristotle, Buddha, Confucius, the three great virtue ethicists of antiquity. And these three showed us ways in which polarizations can be harmonized. I think they're very important for today's world. So that's one work that was reissued.
The Middle Way.
2020, The Middle Way. 2021, I actually realized a 12-year project in
12 years.
research. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, 12 years it took. This is Fernando. It's called Beethoven of the Guitar. He was an incredible Spanish prodigy who took the guitar to heights. He brought it from street corners and taverns to palaces and concert halls of Europe. And it's in three parts. His life was unbelievable, but he was caught up in, so it was started as one book.
3 volumes.
So it's a trilogy about his life. He ended up as court composer to Tsar Alexander I. He came back to Paris. He was an absolute towering celebrity in Europe, but his life unfolded during the Napoleonic era, So it brings home that whole tumultuous period that shook up Europe and precipitated social revolutions, which are still ongoing today. People wanting more freedom and more rights and more dignity. This came out of the Napoleonic Wars, and you had great towering humanists like Goethe and Beethoven, who was implicated, and Fernando knew them all. So it's really a story for our own time, because it retells, if you like, the roots of some of the progressive movements that we are today witnessing. So that's Fernando, and that's available also. But it's a trilogy, okay? And the last one.
Yes, please. Absolutely, please.
Last year, I published a collection of essays by Anthem Press. It's called Essays on Philosophy, Practice, and Culture. And these are essays that recapitulate 30 years of being a philosophical practitioner. So it really also provides a more detailed answer to some of the questions that you've asked, because it gives a perspective on this field, and it unfolds in many different dimensions. So as you can see, I keep pretty busy writing, but those are some of the latest books. And thank you so much for asking.
That's very interesting. Like a concept, I can see there a concept of praxis that is definitely intertwined with global citizenship in terms of taking actions and acting and reflecting, also in connections to what Paulo Freire has always advocated. I'm sure that you support some of his ideas.
Thinking is not enough. We are
need more,
condemned, if you like, to act.
We need more.
We had better act wisely rather than foolishly. Definitely so.
All right. So, Liu, really wonderful, interesting, rich of details and conversation with you. I just want to conclude with a sincere thank you for joining Global Citizenship Education Interview Series.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I wish you continued success with this project, and I'm honored to have been your guest. Thank you so much, Emiliano. And we're both alumni of University College London, are we not?
That's right.
I noticed this in your bio that you were there just after my time. But I think that's wonderful. We should have another talk about UCL someday and its mission.
Absolutely. I felt the connection there. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Good day.